Today for Devotions with Daniella, we are reading from Worthy, the Memoir of an Ex-Mormon Lesbian by Chris Davis. This is chapter 5. Eat your chicken soup and pretend nothing is wrong. Some grandmothers are warm and gentle, creative to the extreme, and fantastic cooks who perpetually bake treats for their grandchildren. This wasn't Grammy Butcher's style. Although there were special occasions when she baked date-filled cookies and whipped up a batch of caramel popcorn, for the most part, Grammy Butcher sat. Wearing a housecoat, she sat at the kitchen table next to the window, reading the newspaper, clipping coupons, or rolling her own cigarettes. She wore 2 patches into the finish of that dark wooden table, one for each elbow, resulting from her right hand holding her mug of beer and her left holding a cigarette with ashes dangling precariously from the burning tip. Smoke chronically drifted into my breathing space, and she got annoyed whenever I sent a strategic sigh of air to redirect it. Grammy Butcher had a sandy driveway that was great for creating sandcastles and other sculptures using beach toys and plastic utensils. Stephen and I built many racetracks for our Matchbox cars and sandy towers that we gave nice, close barbershop shaves to. However, people regularly tracked sand in through the front door and onto the kitchen floor. All the scuffing and scratching of the sand wore black paths into the vintage linoleum flooring, exposing patches of the underlying newsprint and wood floorboards. The kitchen smelled like stale cigarettes and body odor, and sirloin steak grease. The walls were yellow, and there was a constant cloud of smoke in the upper third of the room that burned my eyes and scratched my throat. Despite the laxity of her housekeeping, Grammy Butcher insisted that we scrub our hands with lava soap and hot water when we came inside from playing in the dirt and grass. She also had a particular habit about the placement of objects, such as a paper towel that was always folded perfectly into quarters to act as a coaster for her beer mug, which caused a circle imprint in the exact middle of the square. And the placement of her ashtray on the left side was strategically set to facilitate ash catching and butt crushing. She was short, under 5 feet, and I remember jokingly putting my chin on the top of her head to prove that I was taller. The joke did not go over well. Her temper was notorious. We knew we were in big trouble when she gave us what the family calls the Jordan eye. Jordan was her maiden name. This hairy eyeball glare was passed down from her mother. It wasn't until I did some family research in my teens that I came across a sepia-toned photo of great Grammy Jordan. She had a glass eye, a revelation that gave a whole new spin on the significance of the Jordan eye and made it that much creepier. Her facial expression still gives me the chills. Just like so many members of my father's family, Grammy Butcher didn't have to touch me physically to make me scared. It was all in the strategic threatening technique. To get us out of her hair, Grammy Butcher was fond of telling us to play outside. In the summers on the coast of Maine, she frequently sent us out to look for a soft rock. As you can imagine, this kept my brother and me, busy for long periods of time. We scoured that beach, climbing granite boulders, overturning seaweed bouquets. Never did find one. Still looking. In the winters in her small town of Venzie, Maine, she bundled us up in our snowmobile suits and our hand-knit winter hats and mittens, the latter with the string that ran inside one sleeve and outside the other to connect the set. One snowy afternoon when I was about 7 years old, for fun, Stephen and I cleaned off Grampy's big tank of a car, disregarding the dirt that rubbed off with the snow. When the job was complete, we rested by the huge chrome bumper and watched our breath make puffy clouds in the chilly air. Somehow, we discovered that our wet mittens stuck to the cold metal of the bumper. This was a cool trick, and it was only a matter of time before we experimented with our tongues, only to discover that we were permanently attached to the front of Grampy's car and would have to spend the remainder of our lives in Grammy's snowy, sandy driveway. It's difficult to communicate with your brother when your tongue is stuck to a car bumper. Eventually, we understood what had to be done. After counting to 3, we ripped ourselves from the sticky metal, leaving tongue skin on the bumper. The pain provided a life lesson that I never needed to repeat all my years. I still remember the grisly smile of the sedan's front grille, mocking us for our stupidity. When we decided to go inside for lunch, Grammy surprised us with hot chicken noodle soup out of a can and buttered saltines arranged artistically on a folded paper towel. After Grammy made us scrub our hands with scratchy soap and hot water, Stephen and I took our seats at the old, dark wooden table. We choked down that soup and those crackers as best we could, because we understood the dickens we would face if we admitted our trauma to Grammy. Rule number 1, don't volunteer any information that could attract her rage. Keep the status quo, eat your chicken soup, and pretend nothing is wrong. One thing Grammy did well was play cribbage. When I was 9 years old, she decided to indulge my curiosity and taught me how to play the old-fashioned card game. Even as impatient and demanding as she was in everyday interactions, she had infinite patience and long-suffering when it came to teaching me the game of cribbage. She encouraged me to take my time and count my points to make sure I was making a good choice about which cards to throw in the crib and which to keep. 15-2, 15-4. She helped me learn the pegging to keep score. Though she would agree to play cribbage with me almost any time I asked, she never let me win. The day I finally beat her, years later, I had the pride and satisfaction of knowing I had earned it honestly, a tradition that I carried into my own parenting and game playing. Thank you, Grammy. She and I spent other pleasant times together doing things like looking up optical illusions in Encyclopedia Britannica, studying the angles and tricks they played on our vision. Every weekend, the Bangor Daily News punished a mini page with word puzzles and picture search games for children. Grammy enjoyed sharing that page with me, and we talked about the kids that were highlighted in the articles on the front. She also used colorful expressions that sometimes made no sense to me. Her favorite was horse feathers, meaning nonsense. And when someone burped, she would say, "Excuse the pig, the hog's loose." I'm still trying to figure that one out. Grammy Butcher passed away from cancer in the summer between my sophomore and junior years of high school. Sadly, she wasn't missed by many people because of her cantankerous disposition, but I missed her. I still miss her. It wasn't until many years later that I learned the subtle art of intimidation that Grammy Butcher introduced me to, but it certainly came in handy once I decided I had enough of the misogyny I experienced on my LDS mission to California. In 1992, Richard G. Scott, one of the apostles of the church, gave a talk called Healing the Tragic Scars of Abuse. In it, he implied that victims may share in the blame for their own abuse, and therefore may need to repent for their contribution to it. The victim must do all in his or her power to stop the abuse. Most often, the victim is innocent because of being disabled by fear or the power or authority of the offender. At some point in time, however, the Lord may prompt a victim to recognize a degree of responsibility for abuse. Your priesthood leader will help you assess your responsibility so that, if needed, it can be addressed. Otherwise, the seeds of guilt will remain and sprout into bitter fruit. Yet no matter what degree of responsibility, from absolutely none to increasing consent, the healing power of atonement of Jesus Christ can provide a complete cure. Forgiveness can be obtained for all involved in abuse. The talk was presented to the general church population only weeks before I was to enter the missionary training center to prepare for my 18-month mission. At 21, I was committed to following everything the church leaders instructed me to do. I was ready to teach the good people of California what God wanted them to do with their lives. However, this talk brought me no comfort or healing. This rhetoric of victim blaming made me feel even worse about myself and the experiences I had with my stepfather. Not only was he free from blame, but now I was indirectly culpable for my own abuse. Yes, I had experienced trauma at the hands of those who were supposed to protect me, but once again I was being reminded to keep my head down and maintain the status quo. Horse feathers, eat your chicken soup and pretend nothing is wrong. Part of my preparation for serving as a mission was to contribute as much money as I could to the church to cover mission expenses. After I emptied my savings account, my bishop, who was also my employer, calculated that I hadn't paid enough. I explained that I had spent a small portion of earnings on missionary clothes and luggage, but he didn't believe I had exhausted all my resources. So he counseled me to approach my stepfather and ask him for money, even though he was aware of my history with him. Still, I was obedient to my priesthood leader. Of course, my stepfather, who was no longer attending church at that point, refused to support me on my LDS mission. But it was the humiliation of asking him for money that was re-traumatizing for an abuse survivor like me. The guilt and sadness I felt because of Elder Scott's talk were unbearable and sent me into a spiral of self-loathing and renewed feelings of unworthiness. This was especially devastating because of the constant pressure on a missionary to live a life of purity and perfection. Any transgression could make me unworthy of the Holy Ghost's influence, which could lead me to my missing souls who were supposed to hear my religious message. I didn't want to deprive anyone of the truth and the potential for eternal salvation. That's a lot of pressure for a volunteer missionary in her early 20s. We've been visiting Terry like you asked. We go to her apartment every week to chat, share a positive message, pet her dog, and clean up a little since she can't see, I told the bishop. Terry was a blind elderly woman in a Mormon congregation in Salinas, California. Her bishop had asked my companion and me to visit members of the church in his geographical area and report back to him and his priesthood executive committee about them. I continued my report. Something happened this week, though, that we're not sure you're aware of. When Terry didn't answer her buzzer, a neighbor informed us she had passed away. I paused to determine whether these men knew this about Terry. There was awkward silence while the men exchanged sheepish glances. Then the bishop burst into laughter he could no longer contain. "You rang a dead woman's doorbell?" he asked, with no pretense of respect for the deceased. The room erupted with levity, as if I had told a joke about a rabbi, a priest, and a Mormon walking into a bar. Before I could process the meaning of this outburst, the bishop asked me about the Dawsons. I began hesitantly. The Dawsons are a lovely family. They've welcomed us into their home, and we've become friends. Mr. Dawson, as you know, was excommunicated, and now that some time has passed, he's expressed interest in being rebaptized. Privately, I admired Mr. Dawson and his family for their strength and commitment to each other and to God. It didn't take long for me to recognize that this room of leaders did not share my respect for this family. Winks, elbows, and chuckles took a pleasure cruise around the large oak table as this good old boys club whispered about the shameful things Mr. Dawson supposedly did to get kicked out of the church. I imagined cigar smoke and swirling brandy snifters accessorizing their gestures. Horse feathers. This was the moment I announced that my companion and I would not be returning to this meeting in the future because we didn't feel comfortable sharing information with the committee. The bishop threatened, "I'll tell your zone leaders that you're being uncooperative." This threat, on top of the insensitivity toward his congregants, brought my usual mild manner up to a boil. My anger came through when I met the bishop's eye for a beat before responding, "Those 19-year-old boys don't have any authority over me." I punctuated my point with a heavy dose of the Jordan eye, both for good measure and to add to the assertion of feminine authority I was trying to entreat. Again, it was all in the strategic threatening techniques. Thanks, Grammy Butcher and Aunt Nola. The room looked like a still life of a 7-10 split at the bowling alley. Men paused in various positions of leaning in and out of their chairs. I had their attention. I exited the room and, true to my word, never returned. I was 3 years older than most of the young men missionaries he was talking about. Boys, I feel, were just playing at leadership. I was respectful of their male-only priesthood authority until they used it as an excuse to treat me badly. Having been exposed to misogyny as a girl growing up in Maine, I was accustomed to jokes about female drivers and subtle comments about a woman's place in the world. But until becoming a missionary in the male-dominated field of proselytizing for the church, I had never experienced this level of discrimination and forced submission. Even our mission president, who led the 200 missionaries in the greater San Jose area, 20 of whom were women, had recently told us how much he hated having sisters in his mission. He said that we were more trouble than we were worth, and that if he had his way, he would send us all home. Sounds like male soldiers. Throughout my mission, I encouraged many men who seemed to abuse their positions of authority. Throughout my mission, I encountered many men who seemed to abuse their positions of authority. The stark contrast between how I believed the church was run and the reality of corruption and scrambling for power forced me to look at the organization in a new and undesirable light. My faith was put to the test. I had to decide where I would place my loyalties, in the men I was instructed to obey or in the higher purposes of heaven. The challenge was to reconcile that these men were called of God and given divine authority to represent him and do sacred work in his name. How could I separate the men from the God? 6 months into my mission, I collapsed spiritually. I struggled to get out of bed in the morning and would lie awake all night, feeling like I had puzzle pieces bouncing around in my head that I couldn't make fit together. My heart was broken. My mind was broken. My spirit was broken. California was the furthest away from home I had ever been, just about as far as I could go and still be inside the country. I turned to the only person I thought would give me understanding and comfort. I called my mother. Mom, I don't think I can do this anymore. I know that it's against the rules for me to call you other than on Christmas and Mother's Day, but I really need your help. What's wrong, Christy? I'm here for you. My mother expressed genuine concern and empathy, so I felt safe to let it fly. It's all bullshit. It's not like I thought it would be. There's so much wrong with the way things are run here. I want to come home. You've committed to 1.5 years. There are people out there only you can reach. Mom, I can't do it. It's too hard. My head is all messed up from trying to make it work. I don't want to do this anymore. Can I please come home? She begged me to stay. Christy, you need to do whatever it takes to stay out there on your mission. This is important. If you come home early, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. My mother had sacrificed so much for me. After the church insisted that I empty my savings account to cover mission expenses, my mother took up the remainder of the cost, which totaled in the thousands of dollars. She regularly wrote me letters of encouragement and sent packages of my favorite goodies to remind me of home. She had been a rock of support, and all she was asking me to do was endure till the end of her mission. I could do that for her. My plea to come home early was a challenge for my mother on 2 fronts. First, I was insulting her church and criticizing the institution in which she had absolute, unwavering faith. Second, it would be extremely embarrassing for our family if I returned home early from my mission. The congregation members would wonder what terrible sin I had committed to get sent home before my time was finished. My mother's social standing with them would suffer. Of course she would love me, but the shame she would face would be a lot for her to handle. Sadly, I could see her logic. She was right. I had to be brave. I had to show myself and everyone else that I could drive through the pain and difficulty and come out the other side successfully. This was my test. I would not fail my mother or the church. I recommitted myself to the work of searching for souls to teach and serve. I delved deep into my studies and performed the daily tasks of proselytizing and serving with enthusiasm, approaching strangers on the street to ask soul-searching questions and providing simple yet profound answers. I modeled a good example to the other missionaries who might be struggling like me. And I taught myself to sublimate my own desires and aspirations for the church and my family, convincing myself that what I wanted wasn't as important as the success of my community. These mental gymnastics changed me forever. I assimilated into the Borg collective, to reference Star Trek, meaning I adopted a hive mentality. My willingness to think independently was muted. I tied myself in spiritual knots out of survival. I put my head down and followed rule number 1. Keep the status quo, eat my chicken soup, and pretend nothing is wrong for the next 12 months. Upon returning from my missionary service, I resumed my hunt for a husband and the goal that was set for me to start a family. I was on the proper life track for this high-demand religion, and I had reconverted myself at my mother's urging. Marriage was next on my checklist of obedience. Cultivating my cognitive dissonance and choosing to believe things I knew weren't true, I continued to ignore my own desires and passions in favor of conformity. I wrapped it up in a pretty bow with sparkles and rainbows. I became what I idealized, and in doing so, developed a self-loathing so deep and penetrating that I had to depend on others to tell me how good I was. They saw my behaviors from the outside looking in, and as long as I looked perfect, I could have a degree of warped happiness and pride in looking like an ideal Mormon wife and mother. On the outside, I looked like my house was in order, but on the inside, my floors were sandy, my walls were yellowed, and I stunk like stale cigarettes and yesterday's sirloin dinner. I was working hard to maintain my image, but I wasn't coming by it honestly or earning it authentically. Both of my grandmothers taught me the pride that comes from working hard and surviving difficult circumstances to come out the other side stronger and more confident. I was squandering my opportunities for autonomous growth and progression by living the church's rules, keeping my head down, eating my chicken soup, and keeping the status quo. Horse feathers.